Hey students, it's Mr. C. Welcome back to class. So today we're going to be talking about culturally relevant pedagogy. And in preparation for this class, you should have already watched a short video overviewing CRP and also having read that short article that I put in the module. All right, so let's get into it. First, in thinking about culturally relevant pedagogy, we have to establish a few things first. What is pedagogy? So this is probably a word that you've heard before, but you maybe haven't looked it up. So I looked it up for you in the dictionary. Pedagogy is simply the method and practice of teaching. So in a teacher education course, we spend a lot of our time going over pedagogy or teaching strategies, teaching methods. And even if you're not planning on being a teacher, we study pedagogy all the time because it prepares us to be better parents and better coaches. And being able to teach is something that's universal. It's not reserved for people in the classroom. All right, so critically relevant pedagogy or pedagogy is something that was coined by Gloria Ladson-Billing in the 1990s. She wrote a book called The Dream Catchers, I believe, and she wrote a bunch of papers, and it caught on really well. And so this is a really good thing that we've been studying this and trying to incorporate some of the things we've learned about culturally relevant pedagogy for the last several decades. Now, there's three main tenets of this theoretical framework that matter, and they kind of can exist by themselves. And so when we look at, for example, at the first one, academic achievement, well, that's not anything new. We've always cared about academic achievement in our teaching. But when we tie it with cultural competence and socio-political consciousness, then it becomes more significant. So let's go through these one at a time. All right. So first with academic achievement, this is the idea that students perform well, but in order to do so, we have to understand the learner and they have to understand us, and we have to see who the whole learner is. So as we studied in learning theories and talked about Maslow and the whole learner or the whole student, that becomes really important in thinking about academic achievement. All right. Then let's look at cultural competence. This is the idea that teachers take responsibility for learning about their students' culture and community. And in so doing, that will illuminate, as teachers, it will illuminate our own biases. And that's a really tricky thing to do and a hard thing to do, especially if you grew up in an area where a lot of people were like you in a lot of ways. Sometimes it's hard to dissect our own culture, but it's more obvious when you're a minority, when you move to somewhere where everybody seems very different from you. And so gaining this cultural competence is going to be really important. Our focus today, however, is going to be on socio-political consciousness. This is the idea that teachers need to be aware of not just learning in the classroom and their students' backgrounds, but what's happening in the world, and how are different cultures pushing against each other, and what's informing what we do at schools. Now, that's tricky because at schools we shy away from talking about politics and religion and things really important to our cultural identity. And I'll admit that I'm one of the first people that I don't do really well when it comes to socio-political consciousness, because I don't like the news. I don't watch the news. I don't read the news very often. I often will, if something important is happening, I'll get it second or third hand and I'll ask people what's happening, but I don't seek that out. I don't like the negativity in the world. And so this is something I have to work on as a teacher, because if I want to truly be culturally sensitive to my students, I have to understand what kind of things are they going through and what things are happening in the world that might affect our students. All right. So here's the question I want to start off with. Is it possible for a teacher to have a good understanding of the cultural identity of each of their students? Now, you might think, oh, well, of course, yeah, we can understand our students if we make an effort and try to get to know them. But that becomes problematic if we consider, in an elementary class, you might have 30 students that you see every day. But what about a high school class where you have 150 students that you see every other day or only for 50 minutes a day? Then it becomes a lot more difficult to attain this cultural consciousness of your students and understand their cultural identity. I think that being said, teachers can make an effort, right? So I might not know each of you individually, but I gave you a getting to know you survey so that I could understand a little bit about you. So I'm making an effort in that regard. Obviously, this is way, way harder in an online context than it would be in face-to-face. But we can look for opportunities to interact with our students so we can get to know them on a more personal level. So ways we do that might be attending their concerts and activities and events and getting to know their families. I know I did that yesterday with a cross-country meet. I saw several of the families and former students of mine. Last week, I went to a play with one of my students where his mother was in the play, and they invited me and my wife along. So you can do things like that. You can be involved on campus. I know I go to a lot of student activities, and even this last weekend, I went and played Ultimate Frisbee with some students and did things like that. So you can make an effort in that regard. But when you have 200, 300 students, you're not going to be able to do that every week for every student. And so the best we can do is make an effort, and that's going to go a long way. In our class, we did a Think, Pair, Share. I'll create a discussion board for those of you who are online, but the question I want you to think about is, why are certain groups featured prominently in the media and in our conversations while others aren't? So something to think about. I'm not going to go into this too far because I want you to consider things, but it seems like every few years or maybe every few decades, there will be different marginalized groups that we really seek to improve their lives. So white older male is not one of those groups. So when we talk about the opposite of this with white privilege, there are certain groups that we never talk about, at least in a positive light in the media, when it comes to advantages and opportunities. But there are other groups that seem to be cropping up way more than others. I can think of a few off the top of my head, and you can probably think of some as well. So you can mention those in the discussion boards. But on that topic, let's think about the squeaky wheel. Why does the squeaky wheel get the grease when it comes to understanding and celebrate diverse cultures? Why is it that we'll talk about one group, but we won't talk about another? Why is it that we'll create scholarships for certain minority groups, but we don't create scholarships for everybody in the universe? I have never seen a scholarship specifically for white middle-class males. That just doesn't happen, nor should I, obviously. I'm being a little facetious here. But why is it that some people are recognized and celebrated while others aren't? You can comment on that in the discussion board. Now, here's where some things become a little tricky. Oh, and I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back. Back to the squeaky wheel. One of the things I did in my face-to-face class is I had students talk about what they wish they'd known teachers had known about them when they were in schools. Because all of us have something, right? When I was in schools, I really struggled with anxiety and shyness. And so I did not make comments in elementary school, at least. I did not raise my hand. I did not want to talk to the teacher because I was afraid of adults. And that was a really difficult thing for me. What could teachers do to help in a situation like that? Other students in my class talked about ADHD, or what are some other things that they talked about? Even things like puberty, understanding that everyone is going through the same things that you're going through. Some students talked about how because of poverty, maybe they didn't have designer clothes, and that was pointed out. Another student talked about how she was punished and penalized in ways different from the other students, and that made her feel really bad. So there's a lot of ways that people are slipping through the cracks or feeling marginalized in our classrooms. What can teachers do to improve that situation? So that will be the third question in the discussion board is, as a teacher, what can you do to improve the situation? Now, that's where this other slide comes from, is there are some situations students don't want to bring up in the classroom. So if they're poor, or maybe to the extreme level, maybe they're homeless, maybe there are things happening in their homes that they're embarrassed about or just don't want to talk about. There could be a lot of things that we don't know about our students. And as we try to get to know them and their parents, maybe they're just not opening up about certain things. And that becomes really difficult for us because we want to help. And so if these sensitive topics exist, we may not know about them. If we have students who are homeless, hopefully we'd know, but not always. And I know with my students in the K-12 classroom, there were oftentimes I would go through a long period of time where I'd know a student and think I knew enough to teach them effectively. And then I'd learn something new and I'd be like, oh, I should have treated you differently in some ways, or provided different resources or different opportunities. And I should have been doing that all along and just didn't think to. And so that becomes really problematic. So my challenge for you this week, this is a fun one, and it's not graded, so it's not really homework, but it's a challenge, is think about ways you can learn about other cultures. And the easiest way I thought for this is simply watching a movie. So there are a lot of movies, and I've listed a few here of groups that might be different from you. So with Dances with Wolves, we've got Native Americans, and then Hidden Figures, we've got women engineers that are African American. So we hit tons of minority groups in that one. Mcfarland USA, I love this one just because I'm a runner, but it also is a great peek into the Hispanic culture in California in the 80s, which I love. Dear Evan Hansen, honestly, I don't know what this one's about. I know it's popular and my students told me it's something I should watch, but I don't know a lot about it. Kite Runner is about the Middle East and a different culture there, both religiously as well as politically. I haven't seen the movie, but I've read the book and it's excellent. Will Smith and the Pursuit of Happiness. Again, I think the book is better than the movie here, but someone who deals with homelessness and poverty. Same with The Soloist, if we go down to the lower left. That's about a musician who struggles with mental health and ends up being homeless and has some substance abuse problems. So that's an interesting one. Patch Adams, I can't remember. It's been a long time and I looked this up and I can't remember why. So just trust me, it's an awesome movie. Beautiful Mind is about schizophrenia and dealing with mental health issues relating to multiple personalities. My favorite movie of all time is Remember the Titans, which has to do with integration and having two different cultures come together. It's also about football, which I love. Inside Out, of course, most of you have probably already seen that. It has to do with mental health, and that's a fun little cartoon. So if you haven't seen it, that's a good one. Salmon fishing in the Yemen, obviously a different culture there with the Yemen, and this was another one recommended to me that I haven't actually seen, so I can't tell you much about that. And then finally, I threw on I Am Sam with Sean Penn, who is a disabled adult, and it's about his life as a disabled adult. Now, there are a bunch of movies I haven't seen, so I'm going to do this challenge too. Some other movies recommended from students include Love, Simon, Heartstopper, RRR, and Coco. So those are a few other movies. I have seen Coco. It's excellent. But that's your challenge for this week. Is simply to watch a movie about someone who's different from you so you can develop a little empathy and become a little more culturally sensitive to people who are different from you. So that's our lecture for this time. The homework's simple this week. You've probably already done it. It was just watching that short video clip and read that short little article, and then completing the quiz that goes with that. I'll also add these discussion questions to the discussion board, but that will be ungraded. All right, have a fantastic week. Bye-bye.